Hello, today is the 22nd of August 2025, and I'm going to talk about democracy. People say democracy is dying in the West. Maybe it is. Maybe it's being strangled. But it's not dead yet. And if we want to save it, we need to remember how it was born in the first place. And why did it happen in Greece? Because their communities were small. Tiny, tiny, tiny city states, a few thousand people at most. You couldn't hide in the crowd. Everyone counted for something. Everyone's voice mattered, at least if you belonged in the community. That's the soil in which democracy grew. No giant states, not faceless bureaucracies. Small communities where people looked at each other in the eye. Compare that with today. We live in vast centralized systems, and we feel as if we are sometimes nothing but numbers on a screen, not neighbors in a polis. Is it any wonder then that democracy at the moment feels hollow? Maybe the lesson is this, that if we want democracy back, we need to go small again. We need to rebuild human-sized communities. I'm not suggesting that this is going to happen in the next few years or even next decades. But perhaps we need to start thinking differently for the next generations, for the generations to come, to create local bonds, shared responsibility, real accountability. Democracy was born that way. And if it's going to survive, it may have to be reborn the same way. When we talk about democracy today, we often think of elections, we think of political parties, we think of the ballot box. But that's not really how it all began. If we go back to Greece, to those first experiments with democracy, what do we actually see there? We don't see massive nation states. We don't see millions of people casting votes. What we see are very small communities, small city states. They were called the polis or the polis in the plural. Places where people actually knew one another, where decisions could be discussed face to face, where the community itself was the foundation of political life. Now, I bring this up because I think we've forgotten something essential. We imagine that democracy is only about voting every 4 years. But in reality, democracy was born in daily life, in communities that were small enough to hold together, but strong enough to shape a shared destiny. And so here's my argument. If we want to save our world, if we want to renew democracy in our own time, maybe we have to start thinking differently. Maybe it's not just about waiting for the next election. Maybe it's about reshaping the way we live in the West. Building smaller communities, strengthening local bonds. This is happening. People are little by little, already in the United States of America, people are voting with their feet. I know from my sort of own community, I don't live in the United States, but as a Catholic, I see many traditional Catholics actually, when they start a family, choosing where they're going to live according to the church, where the traditional church is, and so building that community, building their own schools and so on. That is not new in that sense. I mean, I remember when I lived in the United States that I suppose it's still the same now, that people bought their house according to the school district, where you had a good school, a good state school. That is where you would buy the house, because then it would be guaranteed that practically that your children could go to that good school. Well, now it's taking a different shape. It's not only that, but as I said, traditional Catholics are moving into traditional Catholic entities, communities. It's about strengthening local bonds, rearranging our societies in a way that doesn't, not everything is left to big distant governments, faceless institutions, because the truth is that democracy has always depended on people being able to see each other, to talk to one another, to hold one another accountable. It started in small places, as I said, and maybe, just maybe, that's where it can be reborn. The practice of democracy actually came before the word. The reality of life came before the concept. What does that mean? It means that democracy didn't appear out of a philosopher's head or a theory. It wasn't the result of a grand theory. It came from people tinkering with what they had. Actually, the political philosopher Karl Popper, talked about this in a book he wrote, "The Open Society and Its Enemies," I believe was the title. He wrote that in 1945, and he was talking. By the way, Karl Popper's pupil, disciple par excellence, is Soros, him of the Open Society. Okay, he misinterpreted or reinterpreted perhaps Karl Popper's. Some argue that misinterpreted, um, but the point was that you don't need huge revolutions to change society or tanks in the streets, but you need to tweak and tinker here and there and so on. Perhaps that gave him the idea that in order to change society, you need to go and change how judges are elected or appointed, or how this, all these things. Okay, but I'm getting off the point. But Karl Popper, he called it piecemeal social engineering. That is what he called it. No revolutions, no tanks in the street, just small practical adjustments to the way things were done in order to fix what wasn't working. And why this tinkering, which also happened, that was his point, this happened in Greece. Why did this tinkering in Greece, of all places, led to democracy, something which was brand new in human history at the time? The answer is simple: size. Each Greek community, each polis, was tiny, a few thousand people living in close quarters, with their own little patch of countryside, something like, I don't know, Andorra right now, not a tiny little place between Spain and Portugal, or San Marino, or if you want it bigger, perhaps even Costa Rica, something like that. Small modern town rather than a massive state. Small enough that everyone counted for something. Small enough that people actually knew one another. Small enough that accountability was real. That was the root of democracy. Not the ballot box in a nation of millions, but a community that could look itself in the eye. And so people would be accountable. Now, maybe that is what we have forgotten. Maybe that's why democracy feels like it is slipping away. We live in these vast, centralized systems where we feel we're just statistics. Maybe if we want democracy back, we have to go small again. Small communities, local bonds, societies that are human in scale. The Greeks weren't the first to form communities, that's not the point. Mesopotamia, Egypt, those were ancient civilizations too, but they were huge, ruled by kings and dynasties that towered over people. The Greeks were different. Their geography perhaps forced them into small, self sufficient units. Mountains and seas cut them apart. No destiny could dominate them all. And so each little community had the time and space to develop its own identity, its own solidarity. At first, yes, there were kings and lords, but the distance between rulers and ruled wasn't so great. Everyone in the community contributed in their own way to its survival, and everyone counted for something, at least if you belonged. Outsiders, slaves, debtors, they were excluded. So we're not saying that it was perfect. It raises an uncomfortable truth. Greek democracy always had its boundaries. Freedom for some depended on the perhaps unfreedom of others. But still, within those boundaries, something extraordinary took shape. Warfare began to involve ordinary peasants. Sea travel opened horizons. Trade grew. New alphabets were borrowed from the Phoenicians. Ambitious noblemen fought for power, but they also had to reckon with the people. And out of this push and pull, out of this mix of rivalry and cooperation, democracy was born. Athens in the 5th century BC was the high point. The assembly where citizens debated and voted, councils chosen by lot, generals elected by show of hands. But there was accountability everywhere, justice run by the people themselves. It was imperfect, it was fragile, sometimes even reckless. I'm going to read you some little extracts, very short extracts, of how the people of the time dealt with that and what they tell us about it. So, yes, sometimes reckless, but also the most radical experiment in self-rule the world had ever seen. And here is the lesson for us. Democracy began small, human-sized, face to face. Maybe if we want to live again, wanted to live again, democracy, we need to recover some of that. Not just wait for the next election, not just hope the system will fix itself, but restart or start reimagining our societies at the scale where democracy was first possible, the scale of the polis, the small community. Because maybe the survival of democracy and maybe even the survival of the world depends on rediscovering what the Greeks already knew, that democracy is not a word, not just a vote. It is the life of a community, but small enough that everyone can matter. Now, I'm going to choose something here. We know how it worked because there are many historians and there are many literary persons who wrote about it. Indirectly, we can see how it worked, which is not saying that it was perfect in any way. Okay, for example, I'm going to start with Aristophanes. Aristophanes is a playwright. He writes for the theater, open theater, everyone comes and see. He was a satirist, he was a comedian, and like everywhere else, he was going to poke fun at how government worked. Okay, in this particular extract, so they're quite, these authors that I'm going to read you from, they're quite aware that they're not saying, look at us. They're saying, oh, look, they're poking fun for the most part. Especially, and one of the problems that they had was that because it was small and everyone could speak at the assembly, what developed was that if you were good at oratory, if you were good at public speaking, you could actually persuade the people to vote, a show of hands, rather than perhaps, even if you knew very little about it, even if you were not a specialist or an expert. The art of oratory was so important. So you have people debating this. How can we possibly have this system in which just because you can speak well, you can? So they are, pointing to the fact that it has imperfections. Yeah. Now Aristophanes is going to poke fun at, you see, what gave him at women. Not a problem. We can handle it. Okay. But you see, the thing is that uh, women could not vote. Okay, so there were some cases in which some women would dress up as men and go into the assembly and cast their votes. And that gave him an idea. Why don't I write something about women running the world? What what would happen? If they were to run the assembly, can you imagine? Okay. So he gave him the idea, so he's poking fun at this. So very, very short extract to tell you only that they were able to laugh at themselves and to see what was missing or what could be improved. Okay. This is a very short extract. Women in the assembly is a conversation between two guys. One guy is Blepyrus. It's a difficult name. So Blepyrus, and the other one is Cremis. Okay, I'll try not to repeat them too much. But anyway, conversation. Okay, one has been in the assembly, and the other one wasn't there, and so they're talking about what happened. Blepyrus starts saying, "But where have you come from?" And Cremis says, "From the assembly." Meaning that the meeting is over already? Yes, it was over by bloody dawn. But you got your 3 obols, didn't you? 3 coins, money. In other words, already poking fun at the fact that if you went, you perhaps got paid certain, expenses, I suppose. Yeah. So he's poking fun. Perhaps people go to the assembly just to get money. So anyway, he says, but you got your 3 obols. If only I had, says Cremis, but I arrived too late. Why was that? Oh, terrible crowd. I've never seen anything like it. All going to the council there, to the assembly. They all look like shoemakers, ordinary people. In the assembly, it was like a sea of white faces, extraordinary. So I didn't get my fee, nor did a lot of other people. That means, says Blepyrus, that means that I wouldn't get anything if I went now. How could you? You wouldn't have done it even if you'd gone as soon as the cock had crowed twice. Oh, poor wretched me. Whip, whip, not, I can't get my 3 balls. Weep for me who have to live on without them. All that was mine, he's making fun, all that was mine is lost. But what was on the agenda anyway to draw such an enormous crowd so early? What was on the agenda? The presiding committee had decided to have a debate on the safety of the Republic. And at the very first moment, that bleary-eyed Niclades sneaked onto the platform. And the people, they didn't like him at all. The people howled, you can imagine. It's a scandal. Him speaking in public, especially when it's a question of our safety. He can't even save his own eyelashes. What is he doing there? People started howling that. Well, and he, what's his name, Neocletus, he looked round the crowd and bawled out, "What, I ask you, ought I to do? Why don't you pound an onion and rub it on your eyelids at night?" said someone. That is what I would have said if I could. And Kremer said, "Pound an onion and rub it on your eyelids." That's the best thing. Okay. And Kremer said, the next speaker was that crafty bloke, Awayon. He came into the platform in shirt sleeves, or so it seemed to most of us, but he insisted he was wearing a cloak. And then he launched into a real vote-catching speed. He said, "You see before you a man who is himself in dire need of a savior. £10 would do the trick. All the same, I can tell you how to ensure the safety of the Republic and its citizens. If the fullers give woolen cloaks to all who need them, as soon as the sun begins to sink, none of us will ever catch pleurisy. Anyone who hasn't got a bed or bedding should have the right to go along after his bath to the tanneries and sleep there. Anyone who closes the door on him in winter should pay a fine of 3 hides. So we're just charlatans, just asking for free money everywhere. But Lepyrus says, well, that was damn good advice. He only needed to add one thing and nobody would have voted against him. The grain merchant, that is whom he forgot, the grain merchants should make the poor a present of 3 bushes for their dinner. Or else. And next, says Cremis, a good-looking lad came up with a pale complexion, and he jumped up to make a speech. He began saying that the government should be handed over to the women. It was probably one of those women dressed as men. Then people began stamping their feet and shouting, "Hear, hear!" At least the crowd of shoemakers did. But the country folk began muttering. They had some bloody good sense, I think. Yes, but they were in a minority, and he managed to shout them down with his praise of women and his abuse of you. of me, his abuse of men. What did he say then? First, he said that men are rogues. Oh, really? All of us? Yes. And thieves. Oh, really? And bloody blackmailers into the bargain. Not only you or me, but the whole crowd as well. All the men. Anyone said otherwise? A woman, he said, this is what he said, a woman, he said, is a creature with some sense. She has a head for business. And she isn't always blabbing secrets about women's religious rights like we do, he said, which is the sort of thing that, we all do, you and I, when we were counselors. That's actually quite true. And then women, they lend each other things, he said. Clothes and jewelry and silver, cups, woman to woman, without calling in witnesses. And they give them all back. They don't rob one another. That's what most of us men do. That is what he said. Well, we bloody well do that. And with witnesses too. That's true. And he continued, they don't inform against each other. They don't take each other to court. They don't try to deprive the people of their rights. Those were some of his reasons for singing women's praises. Really? So, what was decided then? To hand over the government to women. Since, this is Euripides, you're following me, yeah? Making fun. To hand over the government to them, since that seemed to be the only thing we haven't yet tried, so far as governments are concerned, anyway. And the motion was passed. That's what I'm telling you, it passed. And they've been given all the tasks, women that is, all the tasks and the chores that we men used to tackle. Yes, and that is how things are now. So, it's not me who will need to sit in court. It will be my wife. Yes, and you won't have to feed your brats. It will be the wife too. And I shan't be the one who groans as each day dawns when I have to get up to work, to go to work. No, thank God. There'll be another job for women. You can just stay at home farting. That's what he wrote. We can all just stay at home farting without a care in the world. Oh, there's one risk all the same for men of our age. When women have taken over the reins of government, they may force us to do what? They may force us to screw them. Yes, and what if we can't? I mean, with this particular woman at this particular moment in time, what if I can't? Well, they won't give you any lunch. You better pull yourself together, man, so you won't miss out on either. But it's dreadful to be forced to do it. Yes, but you see, it will be for the country's good. Every man must do his duty. Well, I don't know. There's a saying among the old folk that However daft our schemes are, things always work out all right for us in the end. He goes on. This is Euripides making fun of the assembly in some sort of way. Here's another excerpt from Plato, Gorgias. Yeah, Gorgias is a guy, okay? And they're talking about, again, the oratory and the power of persuading other people. This is a problem because, okay, everyone can vote in the assembly, that's fantastic. But what if you are very good at talking, at public speaking, and you are wrong, and you really don't know anything about what you're saying, but you speak very well, and you're going to persuade the people, and then the people would actually vote for you for whatever you are advocating? Isn't that a problem, really? In other words, the art of manipulation over expertise, as it were. That's another problem. It's not that they were not aware of the problems. So Plato in Gorgias, tiny extract, Gorgias says, you know, of course, that the dockyards and the fortifications of Athens and the port installations were constructed on the advice of Themistocles and in part Pericles, not on that of the specialists. In other words, Themistocles and Pericles, the great orators. And he says the dockyards and the fortifications and the port installations were constructed on their advice, not the advice of the experts. And Socrates, the wisest man in the world, says, that is what we are told about Themistocles, Gorgias. As for Pericles, I myself heard him recommend the building of the middle wall. And Gorgias says, and whenever a decision has to be made on matters such as you mentioned just now, you can see those who act as advisors and those who get their proposals adopted are the regular public speakers. I maintain that if, in any state you like, a doctor on the one side and a trained speaker, a good orator, on the other, had to compete in the assembly or before some other large audience to determine which should be given an appointment as a medical officer, the doctor would be nowhere. The man with the ability as the speaker would get the job if he was fighting against if he was competing for the medical doctor's job. If he was a good orator, he could persuade the assembly to name him as the doctor. And Socrates says, and you say, because Gorgias was used to teach oratory and public speaking and the art of persuasion, Socrates says to him, and you say that you can make a speaker of anyone who is willing to learn from you? Yes. Whatever the subject matter, he will be able to win over a mass audience, not by instructing them, but by persuading them. Yes, personally. So you were saying you were saying just now, that even on matters of health, the public speaker would be more convincing than a doctor? Yes, that is what I was saying. At least where a mass audience is concerned. Ah, well, now, says Socrates. But a mass audience means an ignorant audience, doesn't it? Surely he won't be more convincing than the doctor before an expert audience of doctors. Well, says Georges, you are right there. So, says Socrates, the art of public speaking doesn't depend on knowing the truth about things. It depends on having discovered a technique of persuasion so that one can give the ignorant the impression that one knows more than the experts. And Georgia says, well, isn't it a great comfort, Socrates, to be able to get the better of experts without having acquired any skills that they might have other than this, the art of persuasion? Okay, so he's being, Plato here also being a little bit satirical, ironic. But what it tells us is that they were aware of the pitfalls. And just one more about manipulation, really, of the masses. This is from Xenophon, Memoirs. He's also speaking of, is it Socrates here? No. Yes. Little extract on the last one by Xenophon, the historian, Memoirs. When Socrates saw, although Glaucus' son, Charmides, was a man of note and much abler than those who were then active in politics, he shrank from coming before the people and taking a hand in public affairs. In other words, Charmides was very good in politics. He had advised politicians. He knew his stuff. He was very good. But he wouldn't come to speak to the assembly of the people. Why not? Socrates is going to ask him, why don't you speak to the people, just as you do to politicians? So he says, tell me, Charmides, supposing that there was somebody who was capable of winning athletic contests and thus gain honor for himself and enhancing his country's reputation in the Greek world. But he was able to do all that. But he would refuse to compete, being so capable of doing, so able to do so. He would nevertheless refuse to compete. What sort of man would you think he was? Charmides replied, well, obviously, Socrates, soft. He would be soft and cowardly if he refused. And, says Socrates, supposing that there was somebody who was capable of taking a hand in public affairs, and thus raising his country's prestige and gaining honor for himself, but shrank from doing so. Would it not be natural to regard him as cowardly as well if he didn't take part? Well, says Charmides, but perhaps, but why are you asking me that question? Because, says Socrates, I think that although you are a man of ability, you shrink from taking a hand in affairs in which a citizen is under the obligation to participate. Why don't you do that? We all have a duty to participate. You have talents and you're not using them. Why not? Am I a man of ability? Said Charmides. In what activities of mine have you seen evidence that leads you to make this accusation that I might be cowardly? You see, says Socrates, in your conversation with politicians, When they consult you on anything, I notice that you give them good advice. And when they make some mistake, I see that you offer sound criticism. Yes, Socrates, says Charmides, but a private discussion is not the same as, engaging in public debate in the assembly. Well, says Socrates, but surely a man who knows how to count can count just as well in public as in private, right? And those who are best at playing the lyre, when they are on their own, they're just as good. Obviously, they're going to be able to play on their own before an audience and excel, right? Ah, Socrates, but you are forgetting something which is crucial here, and that is about shyness and stage fright. Don't you realize that these are part of human nature and that one experiences them much more intensely in public assemblies than in private gatherings? Yes, says Socrates, and I have had it in mind to point something out to you. You are not shy with highly intelligent people, and you are not frightened with being with and talking with extremely influential people. Yet you are just a little bit too modest to speak in front of the General Assembly, to speak in front perhaps of the silliest and the most insignificant, could that be? Are you overcome with modesty in the presence of shoemakers and joiners and smiths and farmers and merchants and market traders? Because they are the people of whom the assembly is composed, right? So don't neglect public affairs if you can make some contribution to improving things. For if things go well, it is not only the citizen body at large that will reap the benefit, but also your personal friends and the whole community, and not least yourself. In other words, they give us an idea of the assembly, yeah? And perhaps don't just exclude yourself to the experts, but take part, all of us, in whatever capacity we have in the community, in the assembly. I leave you with this. I think I'm going to do 2 or 3 more because I want to. There are others who speak of the law and this and that, and I also want to get into not only Greece but Rome and the differences there. So I hope you'll stay with me. Okay, thank you very much. Bye bye.